Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I'll never forget the way my brother looked at me the last time we were all together before it happened. Like I was furniture, like I'd chosen the safest, softest path in life and expected a medal for it. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room like it's already his, with that swagger that makes old women nod approvingly and men either want to fight him or become him. And me? I'm just Alex. Just a high school English teacher who reads too much, drinks strong coffee, and can't make small talk at parties without overthinking every damn word for the next 3 days. But this story isn't about who we were before Thanksgiving. It's about how one dinner changed everything. Mark and I grew up in the same house, but it always felt like we were living in two different stories. He was the firstborn, 3 years older, straight teeth from braces our parents couldn't really afford, quarterback in high school, business degree, married young, now driving a Tesla and living in a house that has a wine fridge larger than my entire pantry. Meanwhile, I stayed in town, took a job at Jefferson High, and spent my evenings grading papers and messing with crafts in my basement when I wasn't rewatching documentaries I'd already seen twice. I remember the last family dinner before it all shifted. Mom had made me loaf again, hers is dry as dust, but we eat it like it's sacred, and Dad was drinking light beer out of a can wrapped in a stained college koozie, talking about how things used to be. Mark was bragging about a new promotion, something to do with logistics or finance or maybe marketing. I wasn't really listening. And then, with a smirk that curled just enough to make my stomach tighten, he turned to me and said, "Still teaching the little dummies how to write their names, Alex?" Everyone chuckled, like it was just harmless ribbing between brothers, but it wasn't. Not really, because they've all been doing that since I chose to stay small. Stay simple. Stay safe. And I'd laughed it off too many times, let it roll off my back like rain, but lately, I'd been feeling the storm inside. What none of them knew, what he didn't know, was that for the past year and a half, I'd been building something. Something that didn't fit in the neat little box they'd kept me in. It started with a few paper crafts I'd designed for my students to make literature feel less soul-crushing. Then a parent asked if she could pay me to make some for her kid's birthday. Then someone else. And then someone else. Before I knew it, I was watching Etsy tutorials at 2 in the morning and sketching product ideas in the margins of my lesson plans. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't stock options or big contracts or power lunches with people in overpriced shoes. But it was mine. I never told anyone. Not Mom. Not Dad. And especially not Mark. I didn't want the looks. The side-eye comments. The fake encouragement soaked in condescension. I wanted to build it without anyone clapping or sneering, just quietly, like a seed growing in dirt no one believed in. But here's the thing about building something in silence, it grows loud in its own way. And by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I wasn't just a teacher anymore. Still, I didn't say a word when Mark joked at dinner. Didn't flinch when he asked if I was still playing with my arts and crafts. I just smiled and passed the green beans. Because something was coming, and I wanted him to feel every second of it when it hit. You ever had someone laugh at your dream like it was a joke? Ever had someone you love brush off everything you were with a lazy insult? Drop a comment below. I want to know. Because let me tell you, this story isn't about revenge, not really. It's about what happens when you stop waiting for someone to validate your worth and start showing it in ways they can't ignore. Anyway, back at that table, all I could think about was the numbers I'd seen that morning. 7 figures. That's right, 7. A few thousand products shipped. Orders coming in from all over the country. People tagging my little shop online, crying over how meaningful my handmade place cards were, how the personalized notes touched their hearts. And none of them knew. Not my parents. Not my colleagues. Not even the kids I taught. I had stayed quiet so long they thought I had nothing to say. But silence isn't empty. It's loaded. And on Thanksgiving Day, I was going to let it speak. It wasn't just Thanksgiving that made the comparison obvious. It had always been there, humming beneath the surface like static you can't quite shut off, even when the room is silent. Mark had always been the golden child, the one whose report cards were read out loud at the dinner table like State of the Union addresses, whose football trophies sat dead center on the mantel, flanked by pictures of him in varsity jackets and church suits, smiling like he'd been born with a spotlight attached to his forehead. Meanwhile, I was the kid who colored outside the lines and was told to clean it up, who brought home poetry and science fair projects and got a distracted nod from Dad while he sipped his beer and asked when Mark's next game was. I don't think Mark ever meant to be the villain in my life. He just got handed the script, memorized it by heart, and played the part so damn well. I was quiet, bookish, the kid who'd rather stay in on a Friday night building Lego castles or drawing fantasy maps than hang out with the other boys tossing footballs in the street. I didn't fit the mold. I didn't want to. But in our family, if you didn't fit the mold, they assumed you were broken. There's this one memory that won't let go of me, no matter how many years pass. I was 11, Mark was 14, and our parents had thrown him a birthday party in the backyard with banners, a grill blazing, and half the neighborhood showing up with envelopes and gifts. I had made him something, a hand-drawn comic strip about him being a superhero who could fly and fight villains with nothing but his charm. I worked on it for 3 weeks, stapled it together, even used colored pencils, which I normally hoarded like treasure. He opened it in front of everyone, held it up with one hand like it was a piece of trash, and said, "Alex made me a comic. Guess I'm famous now," then dropped it on the table and moved on. The kids laughed. So did our dad. I told myself I didn't care. But that was the day I stopped showing people my drawings. Mark went on to win awards, scholarships, a fast-track career that made everyone beam with pride. Meanwhile, I became the ghost at family gatherings, the one they ask surface-level questions to, then forget the answers before dessert. They didn't do it out of cruelty. Indifference has sharper edges than hatred sometimes. I think my mom still believes I became a teacher because I just love kids, not because I needed to do something that made me feel useful in a world that never clapped for the quiet ones. Mark bought his first condo before he turned 26. He posted a picture online with the caption, "Hustle pays off." It got 300 likes in an hour. I had been living in a rental duplex at the time, saving every penny, wondering if starting my Etsy store was a stupid idea, if people would even care about hand-foiled paper goods in an Amazon world. I didn't post about it. I just kept working. But don't get me wrong, this isn't some sob story about the misunderstood younger sibling longing for attention. I stopped needing their approval a long time ago. What I wanted, what I still want, is respect. The kind that comes not from loud words, but from undeniable results. The kind you don't have to scream about, because it walks into the room before you do and silences the noise. Have you ever been the overlooked one in your family? The one people forget to ask about, or worse, remember only in passing? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes being invisible leaves scars deeper than being hurt on purpose. I used to think I was invisible. But invisibility is a power too, if you know how to use it. I watched Mark live out the American dream like he'd invented it. Fast cars, designer watches, 2 vacations a year, and a social media feed that looked like a damn advertisement for success. But the more I looked at him, the more I realized it was a performance. The constant updates, the humble brags, the photos from restaurants with price tags instead of menus, it all reeked of someone trying too hard to convince the world he was winning. Meanwhile, I was downstairs in my basement, surrounded by scraps of paper and ink-stained fingers, shipping out orders with handwritten thank you notes, every one of them a small rebellion against the idea that value comes only with volume. Mark and I were born in the same house, but we were raised in different universes. His was made of applause and high expectations. Mine was built from silence and survival. And yet, despite everything, we both ended up chasing the same thing: validation. He just needed it from everyone else. I only needed it from myself. And that's why, when Thanksgiving came around again, I wasn't afraid of what he'd say. I had something better than a comeback. I had proof. But he didn't know that yet. It started, like most big things do, with something small, an idea scribbled on the back of a student's essay I was grading late one night, where the handwriting blurred into the margins and made me think of turning their lines into something tangible, something beautiful, something that could last beyond the paper and the grade. It wasn't a grand plan, and I didn't sit up in bed one day shouting Etsy, as if the universe had just handed me a path to fortune. No, it started with glue on my hands, paper scraps in my sink, and a ridiculous little embossing machine I bought secondhand from a garage sale run by a woman who smelled like lavender and menthol. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Maria, the only teacher at Jefferson High who actually seemed to like talking to me in the break room. I kept it close, like a secret I wasn't sure I had the right to share yet. The first listing I posted was just a set of handmade bookmarks with quotes from classic novels, each one pressed in gold foil, the kind that shines when you tilt it against the light just right. I didn't expect them to sell. I just needed to see them out in the world, needed to believe I could make something people might want. When the first order came in someone named Karen from Ohio, I thought it was a mistake. I checked the email 3 times to make sure it wasn't a scam or a pity click from someone I knew. But Karen left a review, a glowing one, said the bookmark made her cry because it reminded her of her mother who used to read to her every night before bed. I sat on the edge of my couch, reading her words over and over, the TV still playing some muted rerun in the background, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time, like maybe there was a piece of me out there in the world that mattered. The orders didn't pour in right away, but they trickled like a faucet, just barely left on, steady, patient, unnoticed by the rest of the house. I'd stay up until 2 in the morning pressing designs, printing cards, burning my fingertips on hot glue because I was too stubborn to read the full instructions on how to use half the tools I'd bought. My basement looked like a war zone, glitter, wire, packaging materials, and my cat sleeping on top of a box I needed to ship the next morning. I was tired all the time. My back hurt from hunching over a folding table. And yet, it felt good. It felt real. I remember one night, maybe 4 months in, when I got a custom request from a woman who wanted personalized name cards for her daughter's wedding, 80 of them, each with different inscriptions. I nearly turned it down, told myself I wasn't good enough, that she'd regret it. But I stayed up until 4 a.m. For 5 straight nights, learning new techniques on YouTube, cutting, curling, printing, reprinting, redoing the ones I smudged or misaligned, until I shipped the final box with shaking hands. A week later, she messaged me with a photo of her daughter crying while holding the place card with her late grandmother's name on it. She said, "You didn't just make these, you gave us something we'll remember forever." I cried like a kid reading that. Still, I said nothing to Mark, or Mom, or Dad, or Maria. I wasn't ready. There's something strange about building something sacred. You don't want to expose it to people who might not understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Have you ever worked your ass off on something and told no one, just because you couldn't bear to hear them laugh at it? Just because you knew they'd call it a hobby, or worse, cute? I think that's what people don't understand about building dreams in the dark. It's not about fear, it's about protecting it until it's strong enough to stand on its own. I started branding everything slowly. I named the shop 5th Hour Paper, after the class period where I first had the idea. I spent nights designing a logo that didn't look like every other Pinterest-ready thing online. I learned about packaging, customer service, bulk shipping, social media promotion, SEO, tags, and how to run ads with a budget that barely covered my groceries. I skipped nights out, let calls go to voicemail, missed staff events, and lied to my principal about why I kept taking sick days around the holidays. Truth was, I was filling orders. Hundreds of them. Still, no one knew. Not even when one of my designs was featured on a viral wedding account, and I hit over 300 orders in 48 hours. I called in sick and barely slept, running on caffeine, anxiety, and the thrill of finally feeling like the thing I built had found its heartbeat. People still called me just a teacher. I still smiled politely when someone at school asked if I ever thought about doing something more. I still stood across from Mark at family gatherings and listened to him talk about his new contracts, his company car, his European trip. But I didn't care anymore. Because downstairs, under the low ceiling and the flickering basement light, something beautiful was being born. And soon, whether Mark liked it or not, it was going to walk into the room and speak for itself. There are these weird, silent turning points in life that don't look like anything from the outside. No fireworks, no champagne popping, no epiphanies in the mirror, but somehow, the world shifts under your feet just enough that when you look back, you realize it was the moment everything changed. For me, that moment came on a rainy Thursday night, in sweatpants with glue on my sleeves, when I posted a 30-second reel to my barely followed Instagram account that showed a single gold-foiled place card being pulled slowly out of its craft paper envelope, followed by a handwritten thank you note tied with a velvet ribbon. The audio was soft jazz and the caption was simple, because someone will remember the little details. At the time, I had maybe 80 followers, most of them old students or a couple of strangers who liked my wedding sets. I posted the reel, put my phone down, and went back to cutting cardstock for a teacher retirement event someone had asked me to do for free. I didn't check my phone again until almost midnight, when I was brushing my teeth and saw my screen lighting up like a Christmas tree. At first, I thought I'd accidentally tagged a celebrity or tripped some algorithm glitch, but the numbers kept climbing. 10,000 views, then 50,000. Comments started pouring in, people asking about custom orders, event packages, wholesale options. By morning, the reel had hit 120,000 views. By the weekend, it crossed 500,000. And just like that, the faucet wasn't trickling anymore. It was gushing. Some wedding blogger from Seattle, someone I'd never heard of, reposted it to her audience of 200,000 followers and called it the most touching handmade detail I've seen in years. That one sentence sent my Etsy store into complete meltdown. I got over 300 orders in 48 hours. My printer couldn't keep up. My hands cramped from all the writing. I ran out of gold foil sheets and had to overnight a shipment from a warehouse in Texas that charged double just for the urgency. I slept on the couch in the basement because I couldn't make myself stop. You know that feeling when everything you've been waiting for suddenly arrives, and you realize you're wildly unprepared, but in the best possible way? That was me, pacing barefoot through a floor covered in shipping labels and ribbon, my cat watching me like I'd lost my damn mind, and me laughing to myself at 4 a.m. because holy hell, it was actually happening. I had to hire help. Quietly. I put out an anonymous post in a local crafting Facebook group under a burner profile asking if anyone knew someone with fast hands and a steady eye for paper detail. I hired a retired librarian named Joyce who used to run her own calligraphy workshop and worked faster than I did. She came over every afternoon, drank lemon water with too much ice, and didn't ask a single personal question. She just said, "Let's make them beautiful," and that was that. I never told my parents. Not a word. When they called to ask how school was, I gave them the usual script, same old. Still grading papers. Kids don't read enough. Yeah, I'm fine. I didn't want their curiosity. I wanted space to breathe. The only time I almost slipped was when Mom asked why I sounded tired, and I told her I'd been working on a side project. She said, "That's nice, honey. You should take it easy," like I was making scrapbooks for therapy. And Mark? Mark had no idea. He was too busy updating his LinkedIn every time he sneezed. We weren't close, and he never called unless it was for Dad's birthday or to share some new business article he thought I'd find inspiring. I let him keep thinking I was still the guy in the corner with dusty shelves and coffee stains on my papers. That illusion suited me just fine for now. Have you ever had a moment when the world started paying attention and the people closest to you didn't even notice? Like you were screaming in a room full of sleeping statues? The wildest thing about going viral was how little it actually changed my day-to-day in the beginning. The orders grew, sure, but no one from school noticed, not even the other teachers. I'd still show up to class Monday morning with ink on my fingers and a headache from staying up too late, and the kids would still ask if we were going to watch a movie instead of reading. I taught Shakespeare by day and made magic by night, like some weird version of Clark Kent who smelled like glue and lavender wax. By the end of the first month, I'd hit 5 figures in revenue. Etsy emailed me about joining their featured shops program. A wedding planner from Los Angeles messaged me about becoming her preferred vendor. And yet, at the next family dinner, Mark still asked if I'd considered going back for a master's so I could move up a little. I just smiled and said, I like where I am right now. He grinned like he thought that meant I'd given up. He had no idea. The air always feels a little thicker on Thanksgiving morning in my parents' house, like the walls remember all the tension from years past and keep it tucked into the corners, ready to leak out the moment someone brings up politics, football, or anything remotely personal. It's the smell of overcooked turkey and cinnamon candles that never quite masks the undercurrent of judgment and old wounds, subtle, sharp, and disguised behind polite smiles and casserole dishes. This year, though, I arrived with a plan. Not a speech. Not a mic drop, just something quiet, deliberate, and carefully designed to do what words never could. I showed up 2 hours early, told Mom I wanted to help with the table setup. She seemed surprised, but not suspicious, and handed me a stack of linen napkins like she still expected me to fold them wrong on purpose. I brought my own box in with me, said it was just a few touches for the table, and she waved me off with that half smile that says, at least he's trying. But inside that plain white box were 50 handcrafted place cards, each one custom-made with gold foil initials, pressed floral elements, and a sealed thank you note tucked discreetly behind the card. Not a word on them about me, except for a small, delicate logo printed on the back corner. 5th hour paper. No name. No Etsy link. Just the emblem I'd spent days perfecting, embossed on heavyweight stock like it belonged in a gallery. I laid them out one by one, moving slowly, letting the silence fill the space around me. Dad came through to grab a beer from the fridge and muttered something about how fancy things looked this year, then shuffled back to the living room to rewatch the same game from 1997 like it was sacred scripture. Mark and his wife showed up last, of course, breezing in with boutique wine and a pie they probably bought on the way and passed off as homemade. He looked good, he always does, but in that overly polished way that feels like performance. His eyes swept the table, then flicked to me, and I saw the curiosity settle in just long enough to crack his armor. You go full Martha Stewart this year? He asked, not unkindly, but with that lilt he always used when talking about things he thought were beneath him. I shrugged. Just thought we could make it a little special. He picked up one of the cards, turned it in his hand, squinted at the gold embossing like he was trying to find a flaw in it. Then he saw the logo and gave me a look, curious but cautious. Like he couldn't tell whether this was some new hobby I'd picked up or a sign of something deeper he wasn't ready to acknowledge. There. Nice, he said finally, and I almost laughed, because you could practically see the effort it took for him to say that single word without gagging on it. The rest of the family trickled in cousins, aunts, neighbors who weren't technically invited, but showed up every year anyway. And one by one, they noticed the cards. Mom started asking where I bought them. I told her I made them. Her eyebrows went up just a little, the way they used to when I brought home report cards with too many satisfactory marks. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. The room filled up quickly, all the usual noise and chaos. Kids screaming about Wi-Fi, someone arguing over cranberry sauce, a political debate starting in the kitchen before anyone could stop it. But beneath all of that, I felt something shift. It wasn't big. It wasn't loud. But it was there. People touched the cards like they were afraid of ruining them. They whispered to each other about how beautiful and professional they looked. A few guests asked Mom where she found them. She gestured vaguely in my direction, then changed the subject. I could tell she didn't quite know how to explain it, didn't understand what it was or what it meant. But that was okay. She didn't need to. Not yet. Have you ever had a moment where you knew something was about to happen, something you couldn't undo, and all you could do was breathe through it and let the moment build until it couldn't be ignored anymore? That was me, standing in my childhood home, watching the people who had written me off for years unknowingly admire the thing they once would have called silly, pointless, or worse, a waste of time. I didn't need their compliments. I needed their silence. That uneasy pause where someone starts to realize they've missed something important. That subtle tension in the room when they sense you've been doing more than they assumed, that you've become someone else entirely while they were busy looking the other way. Dinner was called. Everyone moved to the table, and for the first time in years, no one fought over seats. They each found the one with their name on it, read the handwritten notes, and got quiet in that way people do when they're unexpectedly moved and aren't sure how to say so without sounding corny. It was subtle, but real. I watched them open the little cards and read what I'd written, not poetry, not quotes, just honest lines about gratitude and small moments I remembered with them. Mark sat down across from me, flipped his card over, stared at the logo again. Still, he said nothing. But his eyes said everything. The feast hadn't even started yet. But I could already feel the shift. And I knew this was just the beginning. There was a moment right before the dinner began when everything seemed to freeze, not in a literal sense, but in that emotional quiet where the hum of conversation slows, where eyes drift toward one another. And you can almost hear the weight of unspoken things settling onto the shoulders of the people in the room. The turkey had been carved, steam rising like some ceremonial fog, and every dish had found its rightful place along the too-long table, dressed in harvest-themed colors, and awkwardly mismatched serving were pulled from drawers that hadn't been organized since the 90s. I sat near the middle, as usual, next to the folding chair with the loose screw and across from Mark, whose glass of wine was already refilled twice, and whose voice had just started rising a little louder than everyone else's. Mark had always loved a captive audience, especially when he knew most of the people in the room were used to letting him run the show. He leaned back in his chair, loosened the collar on his over-starched button-down, and launched into another story about one of his clients, something about a deal closing, a huge quarterbacking a campaign. Words that felt like buzzwords stitched together for maximum ego inflation. People nodded, some laughed, others barely listened, but no one interrupted him. Then it happened. He glanced at me mid-sentence, as if I'd just wandered into his memory uninvited, and tilted his glass toward my end of the table with that smirk I'd seen too many times growing up. The one that said he was about to drop something he thought was clever and harmless, but which always landed like a sucker punch to the ribs. His voice lifted just enough to cut through the side chatter. "So, Alex," he said, swirling his wine like it made him smarter, "still making trinkets in the basement?" There was a pause, sharp, hollow, jagged like glass between your teeth, and then the laughter started, soft at first, then louder as a few people around the table followed his lead, not maliciously, but out of habit. Because that's what you do when the funny, successful brother makes a joke, you laugh. You don't question the joke. You don't check to see if it cut someone open first. I didn't say anything. I didn't look at him. I didn't try to defend myself or crack a fake smile to keep things smooth and tension-free like I might have done in years past. Instead, I reached into the small wooden box next to my chair, the one I'd placed there hours before, quietly, while everyone else was outside arguing about football or drinking on the porch, and pulled out a final stack of place cards, each wrapped in a thin vellum sleeve, sealed with a wax stamp in a deep bronze tone that shimmered under the warm kitchen light. I began walking around the table, one by one, placing them gently in front of each person, no words, no fanfare. People watched me, first with confusion, then with curiosity, as they opened the sleeves and slid out their new cards, more intricate than the ones I'd set earlier. These were different. On one side, their names in ornate script, foil-stamped and lined with delicate pressed leaves. On the back, a thank you message, personal and poetic, followed by a small print that caught the eye immediately, Fifth Hour Paper Company, as seen in modern weddings, Southern charm, and artisan living. Mark blinked. He picked up his card like it might bite him and flipped it once, then again, and then he saw the QR code at the bottom corner. He scanned it with the casual arrogance of someone certain he was about to see another silly blog or Pinterest page filled with glitter crafts. What came up instead was my professional landing page, clean, elegant, with a black and white video playing softly in the background, hands working carefully on a custom suite of invitations, testimonials scrolling beside brand logos, and bold text right beneath my name that read, "Over $1 million in sales, trusted by planners nationwide." The room fell so silent you could hear the click of his phone case snapping shut again. He didn't say anything, not right away. He just looked at me across the table, and for the first time I could ever remember, there was no smirk, no sarcasm, no comeback. Just that quiet, stunned face people get when they realize they've misjudged someone so completely that it knocks the breath out of them. Have you ever seen someone swallow their pride so fast it looked like it physically hurt them? Ever watched a person realize in real time that the punchline they just tossed into the room was actually the rope they used to hang themselves? I returned to my seat, folded my napkin neatly in my lap, and took a slow sip of water. I still didn't say anything, because the thing was, I didn't need to. The cards said it all. The website said it louder. And his silence screamed the rest. No one laughed after that. Even Mom looked different, like something had just clicked into place, and she wasn't sure whether to apologize or just pretend she'd always believed in me. Mark picked at his food, but didn't finish it. The conversation limped on, awkward and shallow, jumping from weather to movies to anything that might drag attention away from what had just unfolded in front of their mashed potatoes and gravy. But the tension never left. It just lingered in the corners of the room, clinging to the silverware and the half-full wine glasses, humming in the air like an old song everyone recognized, but no one wanted to admit they knew by heart. And me? I finally felt taller than him, not because I'd proven something, but because I hadn't needed to explain anything. He didn't even try to hide it, which somehow made it worse or maybe better, depending on how you looked at it, because when Mark reached for his phone again after the meal, his fingers were moving with that fake casualness people use when they're doing something they know might backfire. He typed quickly, head tilted down, but his eyes flicked up every so often, scanning faces, checking to see if anyone was watching. I watched him, of course. I watched everything. I always have. It's what people like me do, those of us who've spent a lifetime listening to rooms louder than us, observing the cracks in conversations, collecting details the way others collect praise. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. But I knew the exact moment he found it. He was halfway through chewing a bite of sweet potato casserole when his screen loaded fully. I saw the shift happen in real time, his face tightening, the color in his ears darkening, his posture going stiff like someone had just called his name in the middle of a quiet church. And then, slowly, like the world around him had blurred out completely, his thumb began scrolling. There it was right in front of him, probably framed in the same glowing rectangle he'd used to read about market trends and quarterly growth projections. Fifth Hour Paper Company. Website. Forbes feature. Modern Weddings Top Vendor of the Year. Over $1 million in sales. 2 full-time employees. For contracted designers. Featured in Southern Charm magazine, Artisan Living, and a dozen niche wedding publications with enough reach to matter. He kept scrolling. My photo was there, me in my basement studio, sleeves rolled up, tools laid out neatly, a look on my face that was more focused than proud. The quote underneath it read, "I just wanted to make something people could hold and remember." He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach with a velvet glove filled with bricks. The silence stretched too long. Long enough for others at the table to notice. Dad raised an eyebrow, still mid-sip of his beer, and asked what he was reading. Mark didn't respond right away. He just set the phone down on the table, not dramatically, not forcefully, but with a kind of defeated reverence, like maybe he thought if he moved too fast, the truth would break through and spill everywhere. Then, he looked up at me across the table. "You made over $1 million doing this?" The words came out smaller than usual. Not weak, but unsure. Like he was trying them on for size and couldn't quite tell if they fit. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Everyone at the table was already looking at me, their eyes flicking between me and the wax-stamped cards in front of their plates, like they'd all just discovered they'd been part of a story they hadn't realized was being written. Mark looked at Mom, then at Dad, then back at the place card in front of him as if it might suddenly offer up some kind of clue, something to help him reframe the last 2 decades of assumptions. I waited for the usual sarcasm, the backpedal, the half-joke to save face. But it didn't come. He was too stunned for that. "You never told anyone," he said finally, not accusatory, just bewildered. "Why wouldn't you say something?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, even the way it gets when I'm teaching a class full of restless teenagers who think they already know everything. "Because every time I brought something up that wasn't your version of success, you laughed." So I stopped sharing and started building. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but there was nothing there. No comeback, no logic he could hide behind. Just a bitter taste and the kind of silence that fills you up when you realize someone you dismissed has passed you without even trying to win. Mom looked like she wanted to say something too, but even she seemed lost in the realization that all this time, the quiet one had been creating something massive right under their noses. Dad, bless him, muttered something about not understanding internet stuff and reached for another roll. Have you ever watched someone realize, in front of an audience, that they were dead wrong about you, and not just a little wrong, but monumentally, laughably, soul-crushingly wrong? That moment was mine. But I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about rubbing his face in the success he used to say I'd never touch. It wasn't even about the money, not really. It was about being seen. Finally, fully, and without apology. I picked up my water, took a sip, and nodded once, not smugly, not sarcastically, just enough to acknowledge that yes, he had seen it now. Yes, this was real. And no, I wasn't going to explain anything else. The table eventually found its way back to shallow conversation, but nothing quite fit the same after that. Laughter came slower. Eye contact lingered longer. The pecking order of the family had shifted, whether they wanted to admit it or not, and in the middle of it all sat me, still a teacher, still mostly quiet, but no longer invisible. The weight of it all wasn't in what I said, but in what I didn't have to say anymore. Mark looked down at his phone one more time. Then he turned the screen off. And for once, he stayed quiet. The strangest part was how the noise returned, not all at once, but in slow, hesitant bursts, like a room learning how to breathe again after being sealed too tight. The clatter of forks resumed, the hum of side conversations crept back into the air, and people began talking again, not about me, not to me, but around me, like this safe return to small talk would somehow undo what had just been unwrapped and dropped, fully formed, into the center of the table. I stayed in my seat, hands folded loosely, my plate barely touched, the weight in my chest not pride and not satisfaction, but something heavier, harder to name, maybe the kind of relief that doesn't feel good, just necessary. Mark kept quiet for the rest of the meal. He nodded when people spoke to him, smiled a little too tightly when someone passed the wine, and avoided my eyes like they were sharp objects. His wife whispered something in his ear once, and he gave her a half-shrug that could have meant anything: confusion, annoyance, resignation. I wasn't interested in dissecting it. The man who always had something to say suddenly had nothing left, and I didn't feel victorious, not exactly. It wasn't a win. It wasn't a loss. It just was. My mother, to her credit, asked a few questions once dessert was served, trying to sound casual, like it was perfectly normal to find out your youngest son had quietly built a 7-figure business from the basement and never mentioned it once. "So, do you do it all by yourself?" she asked, stirring her coffee too long, the spoon clinking against the mug like a nervous tick. "I mean, it looks very professional." I told her about Joyce, the retired librarian, and my 2 contractors in Illinois and Oregon, how we work remotely and keep things lean on purpose. I mentioned the fulfillment partner I'd recently signed with for large-scale event orders, and how I was considering hiring a full-time assistant to handle incoming inquiries. I kept my voice soft, clinical, almost detached, not out of coldness, but because I didn't want to make it a performance. This wasn't for applause. It wasn't a show. It was my life now, and I wasn't going to narrate it like I owed anyone an explanation for how it had unfolded without their blessing. A few of my cousins, who'd barely looked at me in previous years beyond a passing house school, suddenly found reasons to linger nearby. One asked if I ever needed help with packaging. Another wanted to know if I could make a custom design for her bridal shower. I smiled, nodded, made polite promises to connect later, but something in me stayed locked up, still unwilling to open the gates completely. The years of being ignored don't just melt under the heat of curiosity. Sometimes you just sit with it. Let it settle. Let them squirm. Dad didn't say much either. He patted my shoulder on the way to the fridge for another beer and muttered, "Guess you've been busy, huh?" It wasn't approval. It wasn't dismissal. Just words floating in the space between us like they were trying to land but weren't sure where. I left early. Didn't wait for leftovers or the traditional overlong goodbye session at the door. I stood, said my thanks, hugged my mother, nodded at my father, and when I got to Mark, I didn't reach for his hand. I just looked him in the eye, really looked, the way I hadn't in years, and waited. And there it was. That look. The one that changed everything. It wasn't envy. Not quite. And it wasn't exactly shame, either. It was more complicated than that, more human. It was the look of a man realizing that for all the years he'd stood on the tallest platform in the room, someone else had been quietly building their own stage, board by board, just out of sight. It was the look of someone who finally understood that money doesn't define you, but the assumption of superiority does, and once it's gone, you don't know who you are without it. He didn't speak. I didn't need him to. Sometimes silence is the most honest language there is. I walked out into the cold air, pulling my coat tighter, the place cards left behind like breadcrumbs in a house that would never quite feel the same again. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get in suburbs at night, where all the chaos is tucked behind curtains and everyone pretends to be okay until the lights go off. I slid into my car, stared at the steering wheel for a long minute, and let the engine idle while the warmth kicked in. Was I vindicated? Maybe. But if I'm being honest, it didn't feel like I'd won something. It felt like I'd finally put something down. A weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying for most of my life, shaped like my brother's voice, my mother's doubt, my father's distance, and the silence of 1,000 family dinners where I disappeared between the lines. I drove home slowly, radio off, head full. The business would be waiting. The orders, the emails, the next big feature. But none of that felt urgent right then. What lingered instead was a question I still haven't answered. Was I finally proud? Or just tired? And if you've ever been underestimated for so long that even success feels like a secret you're afraid to claim out loud, maybe you'll understand why I still don't know the difference.